Good evening, everyone. We will let everybody get situated since we're streaming on a couple of different channels. I know that we are on the Theology Nights page, on my page, on Josh's page. We are on his church's page too, so you have plenty of options to tune in tonight. So this is episode 9. Hard to believe that we're already almost 2.5 months in with the show. Thank you so much for the support. I mentioned it last week, but I want to mention it again because last week was the interview with Dr. Beal, and so that was the highlight, of course. A clothing company called Wrath and Grace. They are similar to Missional Wear. They have T-shirts, men and women. They have some music. They've got a really nice brand of theological wear, I guess is the way to describe it. But if you are a watcher of Theology Nights, they have a coupon code that you can use, Theology Nights, as the coupon for when you place an order, and they will give you a discount on the order. It's a surprise how much. But check out wrathandgrace.com, and if you place an order, you can use Theology Nights. Just as a reminder, too, theologynights.com is all of our past episodes. You can access the blog articles. You can access our podcast. I've noticed a lot of people are subscribing to the podcast, and we're getting a lot of downloads, and we're getting a lot of support through podcasts. I'm grateful for that. It seems like that works out really good for everybody. You can listen to it on your drive to or from work, or as Tim Nowry told me the other day when he mows the yard. So again, theologynights.com is the home for everything, all of our past episodes. You can access the live show. You can access blog articles, the podcast, everything you need to know about Theology Nights you can access from there. And also all of our Facebook information as well is at facebook.com/Theology Nights. So I see everybody is joining us now. Just to say welcome again to everybody. I'm monitoring the Theology Nights page, so I'll see comments on that page if you're watching somewhere else. I believe that Josh is monitoring his page or his church's page, but you can get your comments to us one way or another. So, as I posted earlier in the week, now I don't know if this rumor is true. Josh, when I bring him on, he can confirm this or not, but I heard that the only reason that Dr. Beal agreed to be on the show was because he found out that Josh Avery was our first person to agree to be on the show, and after he heard that, he said, well, if Josh Avery is going to be on the show, then I need to be on the show as well. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce one of my closest friends, Josh Avery, to the show. Josh, would you go ahead and say hello and welcome yourself?
Hey, everybody. How's it going? It's good to be here. Thanks for inviting me, Brad.
So, Josh, we've known each other, what, now almost 4 years, I think?
I think so. I'm bad with numbers, but that sounds good. So
okay, so we worked at the mission together for a period of time.
Yep.
We have spent a few lunches at Papa's. Plug for them if you're in the Youngstown area. Papa's on Belmont is an excellent place to have lunch. Just be prepared to wait for a long time, but the food is definitely worth it. Josh and I have had numerous conversations over the years. Theology centered, of course, but just conversations about life and family and things like that. And so when I was getting Theology Nights going, I thought Josh would be a great guest to have on. And he was actually the first person that, we picked a specific time, and he was the one that agreed to it first. So thank you, Josh. I appreciate you agreeing to be on the show. And so as I did last week with Dr. Beal, I have some fun questions for you that are completely unrelated to theology or anything like that. But I figured to start us off on sort of a humorous note, I'm going to ask you some of those types of questions. Does that sound all right?
Yeah, that sounds good.
Okay. So your first question is, would you rather run a 5K or eat 100 chicken wings in one sitting?
Definitely rather run a 5K. Yeah.
Really?
Am I supposed to be explaining the reasons behind this or just answering it?
Well, you can explain, yeah.
I mean, I like chicken wings, but I don't want to eat 100 necessarily. I'm gonna be in the bathroom for a long time after that.
So it's the quantity of the wings. That's what's making you say no.
Probably, but I mean, 3.1 miles isn't that long.
Yeah, it is that long. Anytime that we've ever talked about running, your response is it's not that long.
Yeah, it's not that far.
It is.
3.1 is not that far. Do that on an average day, so it's
That's
not that
like
bad.
running to Cleveland, basically. You're just saying to me, like,
Uh, a little bit longer than
I
that, but
I
you can.
think Greg Smith wants to know where his book is. Also,
Okay, his book should be okay. If it's not there, we'll talk maybe about this a little bit later about the book. But you should if you pre-ordered the book, Greg, call headquarters, message me later. I'll send you the email or the phone number for it, and you can call them directly and get a tracking number on it.
do you have a customer service team now?
Not me personally,
Not you.
but I
Okay, all
do.
right. Okay, so then the 5K is the winner.
Yes,
Okay.
yeah, I would say that
Okay, next
definitely.
question. This is the fun one, okay? Will you grow a beard if this episode gets 1,000 views? And I'm not talking about do you have the ability to grow a beard. I'm just
Yeah.
saying, will you not shave for an extended period of time if this gets 1,000 views?
Well, the problem with it is probably the biggest issue would be that Carissa will be mad at me if I do that. So if I try to do that, so I should probably say no to that only because of that reason alone.
She'll be mad at your attempt to grow a beard, or she'll be mad
Yeah.
that it doesn't come in fully?
Now she'll just be mad at my attempt to do it because I used to have, I don't even know what this is called, but when you just like grow something right
A
here
Fu
and you,
Manchu.
yeah, I guess. And isn't that a lot longer on the
I
sides, I
think
think,
so.
though? So mine was just in the middle. Soul patch or whatever that is, that like most youth
Yeah,
pastors
that's
are
it.
required.
That's it.
Most youth pastors are required to have that at some point. That's like a requirement when you actually become a youth pastor.
And a
So I had
tattoo in
started doing
Hebrew,
that.
right?
Yeah, so I started doing that, and then Carissa made me like shave every, so I couldn't do it anymore. So
Also, Christine likes your Switchfoot T-shirt.
yes, yeah, the switch foot, everything's of course backwards. When I hold up books or anything like that, it's gonna be backwards because of Apple. So sorry about that, but
I think it
somebody figured
actually.
it out.
I think because my software flips it, so I think you're actually normal.
Oh, awesome, awesome. Okay, well that helps then.
Well, actually, no. You know what? It's not. It looks normal
Oh,
because it reverses it. That's what it does.
okay,
Skype, or what are we on? Google Hangouts. So
we're
Google
on Google.
Hangouts actually reverses it. So you look normal, but I look like I'm flipped, which is the weirdest thing.
Too
Anyways,
confusing. Too confusing.
last question, maybe the most important one.
Okay.
So late '90s, early 2000 boy bands. Who's your favorite one?
Probably I guess in sync because I know the most of them from back then.
Oh man, my wife is so happy right now. That's her favorite.
Oh, that was her, but that's not your favorite.
I don't really have. I mean, New Kids on the Block probably because they were big when I was growing up. So
You always used to listen to Backstreet Boys real loud in your office at the mission, though.
I
So
did. I did listen to Backstreet Boys really loud. I still do that, but anyways. So those were the fun questions I had. So let's talk a little bit about you. So talk about what you do, what your position is. Where you're a pastor at, and that kind of gives away what you do, but everybody knows that almost. So
yeah.
just talk a little bit about yourself.
Okay. Well, I mean, I graduated from Geneva College in 2008. And so with that, I actually graduated with a bachelor's in student ministry. So specifically, I had a lot of Bible classes and stuff, but then it was geared towards becoming a youth pastor. I grew up attending and being a part of the Tabernacle EPC in Austintown, for those who are familiar with this area. And a guy named Dan Osborne, who many of you might be familiar with, he was my youth pastor. And so kind of went under him. And that's when I got the idea. It started to really feel like I wanted to be a youth pastor, and did that I still am right now a youth pastor. Done that for the past, going on this year, 11 years, specifically in the Free Methodist Church. Just started in the Free Methodist Church because my roommates throughout Geneva were Free Methodists, and they just, as I was about to graduate, they said, "Hey, there's an opportunity in our denomination to apply." So I was like, okay. So I did that, not knowing what it was at the time very much, but have learned in the last, almost 11 years a little bit more about Free Methodism. So I have been a Free Methodist youth pastor, and just coming into my second year now of being a campus pastor, which has a lot of the roles of any regular pastor, but we just have two different locations. So the cool thing about my role is I don't have to sit down and have finance meetings, because that's all taken care of by the main church and the lead pastor over there and their group. I get to focus on more of the, I guess, what I would consider to be the more fun stuff of the day to day, kind of
Absolutely.
reaching out to people. So that's kind of what the campus means in an easy nutshell. But that's what I'm doing now. Both the campus pastoring and the youth pastoring at our main campus. So two different locations for those things as well. So
And let everybody know where your church is at and the name of it.
yeah, yeah. The campus is called Freedom Church Canfield. It's technically in Canfield, but I would really think it's more Cornersburg. If you're familiar with Cornersburg, it's right in the middle of Canfield and Youngstown. There's a little area called Cornersburg. It's on Canfield Road, on the corner of Canfield and McCarty, 3999 McCarty Drive, and it's been there since the 1980s. But just this past year, they had about 11 people there, and they said, well, this is slowly just declining over the years. I mean, people were literally dying, and the church was dying with it. So they said, well, we need to do something different. So within this last year, we've had some families come in, younger people, as well as keeping all of the older people that were there as well. So we now have about 40 people maximum, I would say, average. It just changes each week, but between 30 to 40 people each week there in Canfield. So we're building it up.
Okay, wonderful. What are you teaching through right now on Sundays?
Right now, this whole month, we're doing Psalms. So, I know a lot of pastors that do this because Psalms is such a big book. Instead of doing it all at once, just really taking a few and then coming back and doing a few again. So this whole month, we're doing 5 of the Psalms. And then probably, in a few months or in a year from now, we'll go back and do more until we kind of work our way through those. So right now, we're doing the Psalms. We'll wrap up this Sunday.
Okay, wonderful. All right, so then the next question, of course, that I have to ask, and I already told you that I was going to, what does it mean to be a Free Methodist? How is that different than a United Methodist, which is, the when people hear Methodist, they just automatically assume United Methodist. And kind of right now, there's a lot of stuff going on with the United Methodist system. So what's the biggest difference? You don't have to go into all the the nuances and things like that, but just explain how, like, when you and I first talked, you explained it how they broke off, and so just talk about that and the difference between the United Methodist.
Yeah. So John Wesley, many people are familiar with him. He started the Methodist movement, and he didn't even really mean for it to be a church. He was an Anglican priest, and he didn't want it to be its own thing. It just ended up being it down the line. So this guy came along, John Wesley, started some of this stuff. He just believed that there was a method towards holiness, that to become closer to God, there was a way to do that. You don't just kind of sit around and go, I hope my life changes. You have to kind of apply yourself. And so, so with that, John Wesley started this movement, and then years later, this guy B.T. Roberts came along into the Methodist Church, and he didn't like some of the things that were going on. Specifically, the Methodist movement was kind of silent on the issue of slavery at the time in the 1800s, and so B.T. Roberts was upset about that. He said, we need to be big into abolitionism, setting the slaves free, which is true about Free Methodists to this day. And then secondly, it was literally a free church. Free Methodism started in a time when churches, you had to pay for your pew. You had to pay for, back then people liked to sit up front. Now people want to sit in the back. You have to pay for the back. But back then you wanted to sit in the front, and the front had warm seats. They were like boxes and stuff. And so the poor had to sit in the back in the cold, or stand sometimes, sit on the floor. So he said, B.T. Roberts said, no, it's going to be free for everybody, literally a free Methodist church. And so that was kind of where it started. And then today, you're going to see a lot of differences. The Methodist churches I've been to, it kind of reminds me, if you were just to go in on a Sunday morning, kind of the difference between myself growing up in a traditional Presbyterian church versus the EPC church that I grew up in. Just like with the music, you notice right away that some of those traditional churches where everybody was in robes up front, and they were, had candles and, those types of things in some Methodist churches like my grandma was a part of. But the Free Methodist Church is a little more contemporary on an average everyday Sunday. That's the kind of difference that you're going to see if you walk into one versus another.
Okay.
That's what I would, yeah.
That's a great explanation. I remember you telling me about the seats. That's very interesting. Okay, so you made mention of Presbyterian a church and use that as an example. So let's not talk about every single difference between Free Methodist and United Methodist, but let's get some theology in there. So, like, just because Presbyterian is baptism and that's the popular one, what is the Free Methodist view of baptism?
So here's the thing for me too. Like I haven't studied the current Methodist views, like the mainstream Methodism, so I couldn't tell you the difference there.
So,
But
like, let's say,
baptism,
for example, let me make it easier for you then. If I'm a member of your church and I
yeah,
want to be baptized, take me through
right.
that process of what that looks like, how you're going to explain it to me, and things like that.
Yeah, so for Free Methodists, first and foremost, it's not. We make clear that it's not what saves you to be baptized, and that's, I would say, hopefully a core thing in most churches. Not all
Yes,
I
you're
know.
absolutely.
But it's not about that. It's an outward sign of an inward decision that you've already made, that God has been a part of in your life. So you're going and you're making a statement of faith. Is kind of what it is. And so what you need to do, we need to sit down and need to hear a little bit of your kind of your story. I need to hear, that statement of faith is true. But at the same time, we're not going to make anybody jump through a million hoops either. There's some churches that say, well, you got to meet these requirements and then you're going to be baptized. And so, there are some stories in the Bible that just say, hey, what prevents me from being baptized right here? And I guess nothing. So they just jumped in. So there's those two things. We want to make sure someone's, serious and knows what it means to be baptized and doesn't have confusion about that. But at the same time, we don't want to make you jump through all the hoops either.
Excellent. So, okay, so it's a believer's baptism then. So you would
Right.
Okay,
Yeah.
so then let's say, for example, that I'm a church member and my infant child wants to be baptized. How do you how do you handle that? Because that, of course, Presbyterian churches, they'll, let's baptize them right now. So
Yeah.
is there
Right.
different, with a Free Methodist style? Are you going to do more of like okay, well, let's dedicate to the Lord
Right.
this child?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's my thing, and I learned from Doug Raby in Pittsburgh before when I worked for him, but kind of learned that difference. And the problem comes in a lot of times in just some wording that was different in the past. That some people were calling it a baptism for an infant, but it was really what it was a child dedication, and people
Yeah.
didn't understand the difference. And some people today still do that, maybe because some of them are rooted in Catholicism or whatever. But people, when they go to dedicate an infant, they say, oh, we're having him baptized today, when that's not really what's going on. So for me, if somebody says, oh, I want my child baptized, I explain to them, well, it's not, baptism is a little something different, because a baby, an infant cannot make that decision. They're not going to be able to, give a statement of faith or anything like that, or it's not going to be what we talked about before.
Right.
So a believer's baptism. So for a dedication, though, I look more along the lines of Samuel being dedicated. It's the parents saying, "Hey, we're going to do everything we can to teach this child about about God," and then the whole church answering a few questions to say, "We're also going to put ourselves in that direction. We're going to do anything we can to have this child, believe and know about God."
Okay.
So that's really it. It's really, when it gets down to it, it's really all about the parents and the congregation. It really has nothing to do with the baby, even though everyone's focus is on that baby.
Right. No, you're right.
Yeah.
Pastor Ron wants to know if you do Free Methodists immerse in the water? Do they sprinkle, or do they do both?
The preference is immersion.
Okay.
But obviously there's things that sometimes we have to sprinkle. A guy with a cast on, I remember we did, and you had to do some sprinkling on him and whatever. But for the most part, again, we're not going to make people jump through all the hoops. If somebody says, oh, I just can't go underwater, we're not going to say, well, that's too bad. We will do the sprinkling, but the immersion is kind of the way we guide people.
Okay. Great answer.
Yep.
Thank you. So you mentioned, you're what, 2 years now into being the lead pastor, the lead teaching guy at your campus, right?
Yeah, campus pastor. Yep.
Okay. And so you're 11 years into youth pastor, right?
Right. Yep.
So outside of dealing with teenagers and then dealing with adults, what do you think has been the biggest adjustment for you switching from the role of youth pastor to being the lead guy on Sunday mornings?
Well, I mean, there's a lot of differences in just the way that you do things, but at the same time, there's different ways that you go about the teachings, and you go about the youth group versus a service, because we are going to have at our youth group, we do have a half hour or 45 minutes where we do have free time and games and stuff. But at the same time, I picked up this book. I didn't have it right in front of me, but I have it over here. It's Gospel Centered Youth Ministry.
That's a nine
And I
marks
got,
book.
what's that?
So that's a 9 marks book.
Is it okay? I didn't know that, but I got it at the church, at the thing that we were at together. So
What thing? What exact thing are you talking about that we were at together?
I'm talking about the I'm just forgetting what it's called. What is
Basics.
it called? Yes, I mean we were basics. Yes, I'm sorry.
Thank you.
I was just thinking about what I was talking about and not basics right now. So anyway, this Gospel Center Youth Ministry. So what I was saying about that is almost that when you're talking about the difference, um, people get this idea, and I posted something on Facebook to this with a quote the other day about this. But like with youth ministry, it's like, oh, let's do all this high energy, fun stuff, and that's what's going to get the kids to come. That's what's going to keep them in here. But really, you may change the way you do the lesson, or some of the wording that you use when you're with teens versus adults or whatever. But a lot of the stuff is going to be very similar, or should be. The teachings and the things that you're saying, the things that you're doing with adults or teens. So that stuff was easy to kind of to switch over to, I guess, as far as people goes. Then I mean, just getting used to just all the day-to-day stuff. I mean, I guess the big difference is, going to visitations, seeing people, you have to make sure when people are going to be in the hospital, or this person's not here for a few weeks. What's going on? Are they sick? What are they not coming? I mean, what's happening? So those types of things. But for the most part, we have that. What's nice is we didn't just jump into this on my own. So we're able to have the support of the other campus and kind of have these people around us in the denomination too, to really be like, if we have any questions, just to rely on them. So it's been some pretty smooth especially as far as like new church ventures go. You usually hear at least somebody walks out upset and says, "Oh, I don't like
Yeah,
these changes," but we haven't had any of that, so it's been really good.
that is good. Okay, so take me through like an average week. Not like like I do this at 9, I do this at 10, but like teaching. What all are you teaching? How many times? How do you prep? Let's talk about that.
Yeah, well, of course, on Sunday, we just have the one service right now. So I prepare for that and do that throughout the week. So I have to prepare for Sunday morning until just very recently. I'm taking a hiatus right now, but I also am teaching a class at the mission. I finished up teaching First Kings, so I was preparing for that once a week. And then in addition, I prepare for youth group. So that takes up the most of the week. I take off Friday and Saturday for the most part. There's always things that come up, especially with youth stuff on Saturdays and whatnot. But so really it comes down to, on an average week, 3 things as far as teaching times and sermon stuff that I'm going to have to be preparing for.
Yeah.
And on top of that, just kind of looking to the future too. A lot of times I'm always reading for what's coming. I'm trying to read stuff that fits in with stuff I'm coming to. And a couple times I've gone really crazy, I guess. And like for Easter, I just read a book, and a couple other times this year, I read a book in 1 week and then wrote the sermon that same week, because I wanted to know everything I could about this issue or whatever it was that I was talking about, learn as much as I could, and then write it all so it was all fresh, so I didn't go, oh, I remember this and that, and pick it out.
Okay.
So some weeks are crazier than others, but an average week I'm doing 2 to 3 teaching times, and then all the other stuff, people meeting up and things like that as well.
So how do you find the time to be a husband, a father, a pastor, a youth pastor, a Disney World aficionado? All of these different hats that you wear. How do you, I mean, I know it's such a basic question, but really, how do you balance all the things that you have to do?
I guess one big thing is that I really like about this guy. You've probably heard of him, but I don't know if anybody else has. His name is Bob Goff. He wrote this book called Love Does, and one of the things that he does that is more extreme than I've ever done. But every single Thursday, he quits something. And one thing that we usually hear is, don't quit, don't give up. But Bob's idea is, hey, quit stuff, even if it's good stuff, to make room for new opportunities. So from time to time, I just look at things and I figure out, what can I quit to make room for a new opportunity? And so if things are a little too crazy or there's too much going on, I need to, even if it's on a hiatus or whether it's forever or just a short time. So a good example would be, like I mentioned a minute ago, just being on a hiatus from teaching at the mission. In October, Chris and I are going to Cuba on a missions trip, a short-term missions trip, about 10 days. And I've gone there twice before, but I wanted to learn a little more Spanish this time. So we're starting next week in taking Spanish lessons, all the way leading up to Cuba. And so I said, well, how am I supposed to prepare for 3 sermons? Everything you just said, do all that stuff. And still, learn Spanish, take on this idea of learning a new language. And so I had to quit something, even though it was something good, for the time being. So I think that's one of the best advices I could give is be willing to quit stuff, even good stuff, to make room for some new things. Or if you have too much stuff, to just make room for stuff that you need to make room for. And really, it's also an idea of make sure you have room for the Sabbath as well, which doesn't mean you have to just sit on the couch and watch Netflix. For me, recharging, and Krista would tell you this, is not like, well, let's just go to a hotel and just lay around all day. Like, I like reading. That's great if I could sit down for a few hours and read, but otherwise I'm recharged by like getting out and doing something. So for you, it might be something different. For those who are listening, you might say, well, I need to sit.
It's different for me.
Yeah. There's different things that people need, but you have to have that time to recharge, doing something different than you do the other 6 days. There has to be something different.
So you're saying that binge watching Netflix is not part of your weekly routine, how you get everything done?
Actually, though, in all seriousness, I would say it is, I guess, a little bit, not binge watching, but every night, Chris always asks me why I drink some coffee before bed. And I don't know why. I always like to drink it before I go up. Chris likes to go to sleep at like 8:30. So
nothing wrong with that.
Yeah, so that's good. But that's the only time that I have that, Ellie's not running around or I'm not planning for something. So a lot of times I'll stay up an additional hour and I'll watch Netflix then. And that's a relaxing time too. Nothing else going on. It's just a time to be able to relax and take it in. But, I think a lot of us, myself included from a lot of my life, we can look on our life and we can say, how many hours are we spending on social media, on Facebook, on Netflix? And we realize if we were to cut out some of that stuff, we'd have time for all the stuff we wanted to do.
Yeah. What do you tell a guy who says they want to spend more time on Facebook because their online ministry is growing and they need to dedicate more time to that?
Yeah, well, that's fine. That's fine because it's something meaningful.
Thank you. So just real quickly, Pastor Jared and Pastor Ron, they would like to have a discussion. We don't have time to do it right now, but in the future, they would like to hear a discussion about Wesleyan theology. So basically between you and Pastor Jared, and I think Pastor Ron's volunteering to be the moderator possibly.
That would be good, yeah.
So just keep that in the back of your head. So, all right, so we got a couple minutes left. We're at about a half an hour. I always like to keep it, half an hour, 35 minutes or so with the interviews. So let's talk books. We talk a lot about books during the shows. I'm always trying to recommend books. So talk about 3 books that have had the most impact on you in your life.
My life?
Yeah,
okay.
Or recently, or I don't know. If you only think of one. No,
that's okay. So there's a few. I put a few over here, but I didn't know if you're going to say my life in the last week or whatever. I read this. Have you heard of this book? This book is called God Has a Name by John Mark Comer. Are you familiar with this book?
I don't think so, no.
It's So essentially what this book is almost a verse by verse expository of 2 verses. So it's really line by line. It's Exodus 34, 6 and 7. And those verses are the most quoted verses in the Bible by the Bible. In other words, not the most quoted verses by anybody, but the Bible quotes Exodus 34, 6 and 7 time and time again, Old and New Testament, more than any other verses. It's it's verses where God talks about himself. There are many passages where people explain God or what he's like, but God actually describes to Moses himself, his own character. And so this book goes line by line through God's name twice, and then it goes through God is compassionate and gracious, all the way through the weird part at the end of verse 7, which says God will punish the children for the father's sins to the third and fourth generations. And it's like, well, why is he doing that? So it goes through a whole chapter on that as well. I really like that book because it just gives me a deeper understanding of God.
Okay.
Also, I would just say this resource that I have, which is a Bible, but this is only Old Testament because it's Jewish, but the Jewish Study Bible is really good because it kind of gives you that a lot of that original context stuff
I remember when you got that. Yeah.
A lot of other study Bibles don't give a lot of the context, I feel like. You have to usually get into a lot of commentaries for that. So I really like knowing the original context, especially of the Old Testament.
Yeah.
So I enjoy that. And then a book that I'm reading the 10th anniversary edition of, which right now, that I read that really did impact my life, transform my life, is this book right here. It's called The Irresistible Revolution by Shane Claiborne. And some people out there may have read it. Some people may have heard of Shane Claiborne and be like, oh, that's that crazy radical guy. And others might love him. But I would say if you haven't read the book and you just know him as some guy who he gets arrested for sleeping out with the homeless, you might be like, what in the world? But I would ask you, I would ask anybody, if you haven't read the book, check out the book, read the book. I think there's gonna be things in it that challenge everybody. But I'm reading through the 10th anniversary edition now, and it's probably doubled in size. So I think it's worth, if you read it years ago, to reread it again. I guess that's all I'll say about that.
Pastor Ron has agreed to moderate, just to let you know. So we're on board with that. I'll reach out to Pastor Jared. We'll set up a date here and very soon. So that'll be, you guys have to pay attention for that show. All right. So those were good books. So name a book that was the most challenging to you. And by challenging, I mean difficult to get through, or a book that after you got done reading it, it really made you evaluate some of your positions or something along those lines, if that makes sense.
Well, in addition to the one I just mentioned, because that was honestly in college, there's just a revolution. There's another book that called Starving Jesus, and I highly doubt anybody's read it. It wasn't a bestseller or anything, but two of the guys that I know, J.R. Mann and Craig Gross, wrote this book, and it's essentially this idea of what Jesus said. He said, if you're feeding the least of these, you're feeding me. And so if we're not feeding the poor, essentially, or if we're not doing these things, we're starving Jesus himself. And so they talk about this idea of being born again lazy in the book, and being able to be a Christian, but really just having your faith chained to the pew, and okay, I come in and I believe in Jesus and everything, and you don't really go out and do anything crazy on the off days, but it's just that idea of well, I have my faith, and then I just kind of go about my life. But that Jesus wants us to be, and God wants us to be so much more. And we need to stop starving Jesus. We need to stop being born again lazy, and really live bigger with our faith.
Did you write a blog post? Did you write a blog post once before about that book?
Probably.
Or maybe a blog post that was inspired. I really remember you having a title that was something similar to what you just said.
It probably was. I'm not sure. I wrote about at the beginning of the book that I wrote. I quoted that, being born again lazy.
Okay.
So that in there too.
Well, good. I'm glad you mentioned that, because that's what we were going to close with. I wanted you to talk about your book. Explain how it came to be. Talk about how the Free Methodist contacted you and how you got the idea and the time, and just kind of let's just talk about that for a moment.
Yeah. Well, I wrote this book. It's called Radical Forgiveness: How to Give Until It Hurts to Those Who Have Hurt You the Most. And it's short. It's probably 150 pages or something. But basically, I have always, since I was younger, wanted to write a book. And I just, over the years, even since I was a teenager, have written things here or there, and then just kind of fallen off and not finished. But I had this idea. There's a series called the Freemo Journals through the Free Methodist denomination that they publish a few books every year. And there's two things in common with each of them. There are 13 chapters each, and they each have 10 10 questions after each chapter. So you can use it for, to really think through each topic that's being brought up in each chapter for a small group or for individual use. So that was my parameters, were the 10 questions in the 13 chapters. But I came up with this idea, and as I was reading one of the other ones, I saw at the end, it said about the publisher, about who was the editor of these journals. So I called him and I told him, here's my idea for it. And he asked me why I wanted to do it. And we went back and forth with an outline, and then I ended up writing in probably 2 to 3 weeks, and then a few months of editing. And now it just came out earlier this month, and hopefully it'll help some people out with their journey in forgiveness. Because it's that idea that, we're willing to forgive those who hurt us in maybe we think it's big ways, but really when we think back on it a few years from now, it's like, well, it wasn't that bad. That person lied to me. Okay, what did it hurt? But so this really, the book kind of goes through a few things. First of all, what are our options? We can either retaliate against someone who hurts us, we can ignore them completely, or we can do what Jesus said and love our enemies. So it goes through our options. Then it goes through a section on why do we forgive those who are undeserving. There's several chapters on that. And then a whole section on the worst of the worst situations. So talking about the Amish shooter who came into the schoolhouse and killed all these kids. And then the Amish that same day were willing to forgive them. It was this huge news story in USA Today and all the newspapers. So what if, something horrible happened? What if your children get killed? Or what if something, the darkest thing you could think of happened to someone you love? Well, what does forgiveness look like in those situations? So there's a whole section about that as well. And ultimately, there's a final section that kind of wraps it all up called Embrace All, Even Your Enemies. That idea that, our love for our neighbor also includes our enemies as well. And so this idea that, as crazy as it sounds, it leads to life. It leads to a better life through this kind of what we might think of as radical forgiveness.
And where, if somebody wants to pick up a copy, where can they get one from?
You can get one on the Light and Life bookstore. It's on fmcusa.org. If you live in this area, I have a bunch of copies, so you can contact me, and I can probably, I don't know if it's a little cheaper or not, but without the shipping and stuff, but I can get it to you as well, a copy. If you live in this area, you can just message me. So
okay, so let's close with like 5 rapid fire, sort of fun-ish questions. And,
yeah.
And then, like I said, we'll close with that. So, John MacArthur or John Piper?
Probably, I guess I know more of John MacArthur, so I go with him.
Go with John MacArthur? Okay. Tell everybody so we can have this on record that you have read some of his systematic theology.
Yeah, I had read that. Yep.
Thank you.
Yep.
Thank you. Yep. Okay, so expository preaching or topical preaching?
I have to choose one or the other.
What would you prefer if you had to pick one that you would do? And I think you know the answer that I want you to say. So. Oh
yeah, no, but I really would. I would say expository.
I know you would.
Although I do move back and forth.
No, I know, and I. Yeah. Do you think it's because you had to challenge yourself with the Old Testament books that you preached through? Has that helped you a lot with being more drawn towards expository? Do you think?
Yeah, just learning about it more. I've always liked the behind the scenes information, the background, and that really is, you're able to do that more when you go verse by verse. You're able to bring out the background, which is actually more interesting, because if we were to give a questionnaire out to non-Christians, Christians say, well, what do you think Christians believe on all these topics? Probably everybody get 110%. But when you say, well, what does the Bible say about this or that? Sometimes a lot of people wouldn't know. Even Christians who've been in church for years, they could know about topics, but they don't know about even, what's in 1 John or something like that.
Biblical theology. That's why it's so important.
Yep.
Okay, so then next one, to preach through. If you were given the option, what would you rather preach through, Genesis or Revelation?
I guess more recently, I guess I would say Revelation, because I've been wanting to look at that in deeper. And now Pastor Ron hopefully won't get offended, because he gets upset about all,
Pastor Ron's the resident scholar on the book of Revelation. So G.K. Beale, when he was on the show, he actually asked Pastor Ron when his commentary was coming out. So,
well, I'm waiting. I haven't read this yet, so I can't recommend it or not. But this is a book called Revelation Through First Century Glasses, which I'm looking at soon by W.B. West. My interest lately is looking at the idea that Revelation, not everything, but a lot of the things may have occurred. And I know that's can be controversial to some people, but the idea that it was written to a specific audience for a reason. So I want to know why, just as I want to with Leviticus or any other book.
So, okay, so we've had that discussion. There's been numerous of us that have had that discussion about say what that view is of Revelation about things that have already happened.
Yeah, I mean, it would take a long time to explain everything, but essentially, one core piece is that when Jesus, talks about a coming tribulation and a coming hard time, he says, here's the key verse for me that's got me curious. He says, "Some of you standing here today will not die before this happens." So it's like, well, that's strange. So what people believe, who believe this point of view, that much of this has already happened, is that the event he's referring to is not like Left Behind, tribulation force, that type of thing, Tim LaHaye. What he's talking about is the destruction of the temple in 70 AD. And a lot of the things Jesus talked about, in fact, on Palm Sunday, Jesus actually foresaw the destruction of the temple. He wept on Palm Sunday, which is something I never even realized in the story until this past year. But it tells us that, and he wept because he saw what would only bring you peace. If you just believed in me instead of war and violence, you could have peace. But they wanted war and violence, and they got it in 70 AD, and it destroyed everything, including the temple.
So to use the technical theological term, that's the preterist view of events, that it's already has happened. That would actually be a good topic to discuss on one of the shows. It was so funny because for like 3 weeks, that's all we were talking about. I feel like everybody that I interacted with, that was the big thing, and I haven't talked about it since then.
Yes.
I don't remember what question that we're on. So I asked you about Genesis and Revelation. Okay, so then Old Testament or New Testament? If you're preaching from a book, Old Testament or New Testament?
Old, because it's what I know the least about over the years. So I've recently gone to that.
So you'd like to challenge yourself through the Old Testament?
Yeah. Okay. So I finished First Kings at the mission recently. I also did at the church. I did Jonah, which that's not that hard. But then I also taught through Leviticus at the mission, and there was another book that I taught through at the church, and now I can't remember. Oh, Nahum. Nahum was the other one I taught through, and a couple more. But I did a lot of Old Testament, so I need to focus maybe this next year on doing some New Testament stuff again. So.
All right. So my last question, and we'll wrap up with this then. Who was Melchizedek? What was he?
I always just turn that over to you because you studied that for like 3 years, and you still are like, well, I'm not 100%.
So do you think? You don't have an opinion or not?
Yeah, I need to do a little more study on. I haven't done a deep study on Hebrews or Genesis, so I guess that's why I've read it. I've read them, but I haven't studied deeply.
Huh. Okay. I was hoping I would just get you to pick one, but I'm impressed with your withholding of that.
I know. I don't want to say unless I haven't.
I commend that. I commend that. That's a good stance, especially with something like that. I can't get into that right now. That's a whole entire. We'll be here for another 45 minutes on that, and then I'll start talking about Hebrews and the author and the themes, and so that's just bad news for everybody. So,
yeah.
All right. So Josh, I really appreciate it. Thank you so much. Do you have any closing thoughts or anything that you want to add? Christine says you have homework. You got to get back to us next Friday on that. You have to let us know what your position is on Melchizedek.
Okay, I'll have to look that up and learn some more.
But any final thoughts or anything that you'd like to share as we kind of wind down?
No, not any. I mean, I have some other things over here written down, things off the side, but I'm not. That would start a new conversation, so we don't do that tonight. That'll be for the next time, the big debate or whatever that I'm currently.
Well, we'll certainly do a part 2 of this, so keep those handy. Maybe in a couple of months, when I get resituated and everything, we'll plan on doing. Maybe I'll have you live in the studio, and we can do like a dual camera stream or something like that. Maybe we'll do that. That would be fun.
That would be good. Sounds good.
All right, Josh. Well, hey, thank you again. I appreciate it very much. Have a great night. Thanks again, brother.
All right. See you later.
See ya. Bye-bye. So that was Josh. Thankful for him being on the show. I'm thankful for all of you guys tuning in. We had quite a crowd tonight. So next Friday, we'll be back to, I don't have anybody lined up for interviews for next Friday. So next Friday, we'll be back to the normal format. TheologyNights.com. You can submit your questions, submit them on Facebook, all the normal avenues. I have a really large, growing list of questions that people have been submitted, or people have been submitting. There we go. I'm getting tired. It's late. People have been submitting a lot of questions. So if you submit a question, I'll let you know, like, hey, it'll be a couple episodes, or I'm going to add it to this. I'm trying to create shows that are similar in themes. We should do an entire episode on Melchizedek. That's a great idea. Maybe we'll do that next week. Maybe we'll talk about Melchizedek next week. If you're not familiar with who Melchizedek is, he's a guy that's in the Bible, and that's all I'll say. You have to go find Melchizedek, because I don't want to lean one way or another and cause you to believe. Go to the book of Hebrews and read about Melchizedek. And we'll talk about Melchizedek here soon. I'm not sure when. But thank you all for showing up tonight and for watching the interview with Josh. Thank you for the support, continued support 9 weeks in. As I updated you guys recently, Monday nights, we are rotating our Basic Theology / My Favorite Book of the Bible series. Friday nights is the live show. As I also mentioned, our podcast is up and running. All of the audio from our videos will be in podcast form. So if you're not able to make the show and you're not able to watch the video, you can listen to the podcast while you are driving into work or driving home from work. TheologyNights.com has all of our blog articles, book recommendations, past episodes. You can get everything on that website. Other than that, send me a message on Facebook if you have questions, if you'd like to interact. We've got big things planned. That's all I'm going to say. I'm not going to give any details away or anything, but we have lots of big plans in the works. So you guys enjoy the rest of your Friday evening. Have a wonderful weekend. Make sure you are treasuring Christ and growing in your knowledge of Scripture, and you are making His name known, and you are encouraging others around you to do the same thing. Appreciate your guys' support so much. TheologyNights.com for more information. Facebook.com/TheologyNights. Have a great night, guys. See you soon. Bye-bye.